Buenos días a todos. Espero que nos estén escuchando muy bien. Bienvenidos a este evento del Seminario de Visualización de Datos promovido por el INEGI y por el CIMAT. En esta ocasión tenemos un invitado muy especial que se llama Jim Herries. Él es geógrafo de la empresa Esri. Ahorita me voy a migrar al inglés, pero sí quería primero hacer una presentación en español. Su presentación va a ser acerca de una cosa que se llama Policy Maps, que es un producto que sacó la empresa Esri hace un poco más de un año. Y pues realmente la idea es muy interesante porque conjuga el espacio de la política pública, los datos y la geografía como un mecanismo para entrar poco a poco a la estadística, ¿no?, que está detrás de un espacio geográfico. Entonces ahorita cambio a inglés. Jim Herries is with us today, and he's a geographer with Esri. He is based in California, and he serves as a principal product engineer on the team that is responsible for ArcGIS Living Atlas of the world. And he's as well part of the team that created Policy Maps, which is the thing that he's going to be talking about today. The format of the presentation is going to be a little bit non-standard. So it's going to be a few minutes with him presenting, and then a space for you guys to ask some questions and let us keep the flow going for this presentation. This is a really interesting topic. Policy maps are a really interesting and innovative tool in which policy making and that space converges with statistics and geographies used in a really intelligent way so as to bring questions into the where and the what. So without further ado, Jim, you have the floor.
Hi. Thank you. You can hear me all right? Thank you for coming. I apologize, my presentation won't be in Spanish, but you don't want that. It would be a very short presentation, and you would say, why is this man talking this way? So thank you for accommodating me. My name is Jim. I work at Esri since 1994. Started as an intern, and I've always been interested in GIS for what I can get out of it. My background originally was in journalism, and that's just the way I was trained to think about things, is how do we get to the story, whether we're using words or charts or maps. And I fell in love with maps pretty quickly, and I wanted to share some things with you today in regards to policy maps, a project we've been working on at Esri for a number of years. I'll leave my contact information on screen for just a second in case that's useful to you. What is a policy map? Now, normally people who make maps kind of focus on the cartography of it, the look. And as I said, I've always been interested in what a map can tell me. What can I learn from it? So for example, in this map showing some details about the population age 15 and older who are in need of additional education. The name of the attribute is down here in both Spanish and English. The percentage of population age 15 and older illiterate. So from a glance, you can immediately see, based on this legend, areas in kind of this magenta color have a higher rate of kids who need more education than people in yellow near Toluca, right? So we can kind of see this pattern emerge. A difference between a map of data and a policy map is someone has taken the time to connect an idea with the map. And they've said, I need this map to communicate clearly. One part of this data is more important than another. So in this case, the author, my colleague Steven, I think, made this map, said, I'm going to focus the map on areas with higher concentrations of kids who are illiterate. So the map is a little biased. It's, rewarding color. It's giving color to this part of the data, this part of the histogram. And the rest of the data is there, but it's there in a supporting role. It's there to let you know we have data for the whole region, but we really want you to see this part of the data. And that's the essential difference between a map of statistics and a policy map, where we've started to ask a question: what part of this data is interesting? Here's another example. And this is a map in, I believe I did this work in Los Angeles. And every dot on that map is a census block. In the United States, we have census block is the smallest unit of data for which we have a count of population. And so each of those circles represents, a neighborhood, a small neighborhood, maybe 50 houses. And the population who live in those houses is represented by the size of the dot. So this dot here has a large population, and this dot here has a smaller population. This is probably like 20 people. This is probably like 100 people. And then the idea here was, as the title says, population within 1/4 mile of a railroad. And the purpose of this map was to show where the railroads are and where are those housing, where are the people in the housing who live within 1/4 mile. So anything in red is within 1/4 mile, orange is a 1/2 mile, yellow is 1 mile, and then white is beyond 1 mile. And the purpose of this map, someone was talking about analysis of pollution and population. And it kind of bothered me that 1/4 mile was the distance. It's a very small distance. And so I wanted to show the map I was asked to make. Jim, can you make a map of the population who live within 1/4 mile of a railroad? Sure, that's basic GIS. Take the railroads, create a buffer of 1/4 mile around the railroad, and select all the housing that's within 1/4 mile. But I know how arbitrary that distance is. Like, what if it was a 1/2 mile? How many more people would be counted as having close proximity to a railroad? What about this neighborhood where there's red, orange, and yellow? So if you live in anywhere in this neighborhood, you are literally surrounded by rail. It's just kind of interesting. And this is why we make the maps. We want to make them eye-catching, and we want to make them informative. And every map ought to have a clear purpose. In this example, we've got a map of homeowners versus renters, where we want to know what in each neighborhood, what do we have more of, renters or owners? So renter neighborhoods are in blue, and it's no surprise. This is San Francisco. I turned the map sideways to make it fit the available space, but this is San Francisco, and it's no surprise in an urban area, it's mostly renters. But then at some point it starts to transition as we move south. We start to transition to, well, there's more owners. And then there's little pockets near this military or the San Francisco airport. A lot of renters near the airport on the south side and a lot of owners on the other side. Sometimes this just answers a very basic question. What do we have more of? So that we can understand how our policies, our housing policy in this case, might encourage more renters here or might encourage more homeowners here. Depends on what the goal is. What is the goal? Do you want home ownership downtown? Or do you want home ownership kind of on the periphery? Or do you want home ownership in the areas further away from town? Modern maps have data behind them. That's probably the biggest reason I got involved with GIS is I was very attracted to these atlases and topo sheets for hiking. And I asked a simple question: do they must be using computers to make these maps now, right? In 1993, I asked this question. And of course they were. And that is the most powerful thing in the world. The fact that there's data behind this pretty picture in the middle. I can start to ask questions like, how many people are on this screen? As I look at Sacramento, how many people are visible on this screen? What is their unemployment rate? What is their median household income? What is the number of housing units I'm looking at? And how are those housing units divided among purple, organized, owner occupied, so they own the house. Blue is renter occupied. And green is interesting. It's something called vacant. They're empty. Either they cannot be occupied or they're vacation homes or their second home, something like that. All that data. What I enjoy about being a policy mapper is I have chosen to do more than just make the map. I'm also going to ask the person I made the map for, what are you interested in? What do you wish this map would tell you? And when they answer, when they say, well, I'd like to know how many people live here, I add this to the dashboard. When they say, I'd like to know the unemployment rate and how that varies, I add that to the dashboard and so forth. And that's the most powerful part about GIS. So all of you, again, thank you for coming. You all have great timing. It's just an amazing time to think spatially. The technology and tools are better than ever. Maps are within the grasp of more people than ever. It's very easy for us to get maps onto a phone, onto a tablet, onto a web browser, onto paper. We still make paper maps and print out posters and take it to a meeting. So all of those things are still possible. And our ability to discover and explain these spatial stories is very much needed. So one thing I want to get into your mind is the data is out there. There's lots and lots and lots and lots of data. And there are lots of problems that society, our countries, they need to look at. Our neighborhoods, our families and organizations, we need to look at all these problems, and we have all this data. So there's this potential, right, for all these things we could work on and all this data we have, but there are gaps in between these things, right? And that's where you come in. These gaps, they're a problem. They create fear when people don't know how to deal with something. They create uncertainty and doubt. And these things sometimes inhibit your spatial thinking. Some of you are data people and you've never made a map. Others of you might be map makers and you've made lots of maps and you're kind of curious, what is this policy mapping angle? I've been making maps for years. What are you talking about? Others of you direct people and manage people who make maps, or you manage some of the responses to the problems society has. You manage healthcare, you manage school and education. So these gaps exist between the problems, the data, the people who work in those spaces. It's very rare to find one single person who knows the subject matter, who works in that industry, and they know all the data in all of GIS. It's hard to find somebody who knows how to combine all that. And so part of the purpose of this presentation is to let you know you can do something about it. You can pull these ideas together, connect people, have people gravitate towards the choices that protect them from fear, uncertainty, doubt. Now, what do I really mean by that? I really mean sometimes making the simplest of maps is the best way to start because it opens up conversation. I displayed this map in about 30 minutes ago. I came into the chat early to be prepared. Ricardo was there and this map was on screen and he just started talking about it. I didn't ask him to. He just started talking about this map that's on screen. And he knows all the areas, and he found the volcano that's currently right behind this thing. A great map is a window into information, but it's also a conversation starter, especially if you can touch the map and it gives you information back. Well, now I've got it covered. I've got a strong visual presentation of whatever the topic is. And in this case, it's average household size. And when you touch the map to ask it a question, we answer the question. And that's the way a policy mapper thinks. A GIS person thinks when they click on the map, I should present a list of rows and columns of data. And somewhere in that list of 200 attributes, 200 field names, 200 values, somewhere in there, the user will find whatever data they want. I don't know what they want. I can't possibly know what they want. So I will punt. I will just give them all the data and check off the box, I'm done. That's a GIS map. A policy map, when the person authoring it cares about their user, they say, I wonder what Ricardo would want to know about average household size. Ricardo, what would you like to know about average household size? And Ricardo answers. And often the technique I use, I will show someone a map, in this case of average household size, and I will say to them, what do you wish you knew? I wish I knew how that changed over time. And I wish I knew what the average household size is down to 2 digits of precision. I will often literally transcribe what did they say, and I will write that into the pop-up and provide whatever graphic elements help out. So I've talked about 10 minutes. It's probably time for me to pause and answer any questions.
If anybody has a question, they can easily put it in the chat so that I can relay that to Jim. In the meantime, while questions are coming in, so could you expand a little bit more on what the motivation is for policy maps and how you came about with that idea?
Oh, yeah, I'd be happy to. One way for me to do that is, let me share this screen. We'll go to one of the maps we were looking at. So one of our inspirations for doing policy maps was I showed a former mayor, Stephen Goldsmith. I showed him a map of, I think it was a map much like this. And I said, what makes this map of median household income different than a policy map? And he said, it's a fine map, it's beautiful, but it doesn't answer any specific question I have. And I thought, okay, what question do you have about income? And he said, we want to implement a program to help lower income people. I want the map to show me where they are. And for me, the light bulb went off. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So a policy map should answer a specific question. And he's like, absolutely, because you might only get 30 seconds with me in a meeting, and you have 30 seconds to show me your map, and the map needs to answer a specific question. So on our team, we started titling our maps, as you see in the top left corner. We started titling them with questions in many cases. Maybe another way for me to answer is to change this map a little bit from what I would say is a policy map answering the question, what is the average household size in Mexico? Maybe a traditional way for us to look at this map would be, we would take a range of values from low to high. So somewhere in Mexico, there is an area, a municipality where the household size is 1.98 persons. And somewhere in Mexico, there's at least one municipality with a household size of 8.29. And you can kind of see what happens to this map if I kind of use these extreme values to show the color. All the pattern goes away, right? And sometimes we do that when we, as GIS map makers, we classify data and we just kind of let the software pick all the values. You know, to a decision maker, these values seem very arbitrary. So that's why sometimes the emphasis is, let's try to make the pattern very clear. Areas in green in this map, areas in green have larger families. Areas in blue have smaller. And if you're interested in enacting a policy where you want to, you know, provide some resource to families, if the municipality's average household size is 5, then you want to make the map speak that language. So by making that one little change, moving this handle up to 5, now the person I'm talking to who is thinking about making that policy change, I can show that person, well, yeah, if you make it 5, here are the few municipalities that will qualify. If you make it 4, you have a lot more municipalities that qualify. So part of policy making, policy mapping, is to work with a partner who is discussing what policies are you thinking about? How do you think about them? Do you know how sensitive your policy is to the data and how sensitive the data is to your policies? And always remembering that the data is about the people. Any other question?
Yes, we have a question in the chat. So this is from Dani. She says that you say about uncertainty and gaps about explaining stories and thinking spatially using maps. I think it's true, but at the same time, if you compare digital maps with analog maps, these gaps can be reduced because the digitals are more interactive. What do you think about that?
Oh, great question. Where is my, oh, hold on. Yes, observe. Let me turn off my screen share. This is one of my favorite collections of maps. Ugh. I can show my kids it. I can point to things. It's full of inaccurate maps now. This thing is more than 10 years old, and I cannot show them updated information in it. So it becomes a historical reference, and I love printed. But the advantage, to your point, of these digital maps is that whatever map we create is a policy map of, we showed this one earlier about education. Where are the people 15 years and older who are illiterate? If there's something I don't like about this map, I can change it. You can change it. This is why Living Atlas exists. We put these collections, we put these maps into those collections as a starting point, and you can easily go in and say, I don't want to map it this way. I want to use classification. So I change it. And then I say, no, I want to use 5 classes or 6 classes or 7 classes, right? Or 8 classes. Or I want to make it very, very simple from a policy perspective. We might say, there'll just be 2 classes, and any municipality in Mexico that's above, let's say 8%, we are going to fund special programs in these communities starting January 1st, right? So this is often how I will engage with executives or managers, directors in the room. I will start out with the map that's available in Policy Maps or in Living Atlas. It's digital, and if I can change it based on our conversation, I will change it just so that they understand, wow, this is fascinating. If I change the to 10%, I get a very different answer. And that's what we want our leaders to know. We want our, whether they're business leaders, government leaders, co-workers, we want them to understand the data. And that's why Esri chooses to put, for example, the histogram right here on the side, which comes to life when you turn classification off Now you can see the effect that your decisions have live. And this is a new thing. This is why I get very excited about WebGIS. This is very easy to do. So therefore, the power of that is now I can have better conversations with the people whom I want to depend on my maps. I want them to trust my maps, and I want them to change my maps. Shall we? Yeah, any more, or should I continue?
There are no more questions, but if there are more, I can stop you.
This map we did years ago on vaccinations. Years ago, I think we did this 5 years ago. It was about school vaccinations in the state of California. Like many states, provinces, they have a requirement that if you want to go to public school, you have to have certain vaccinations for measles, mumps, rubella, polio. I don't know what the list is. I forget. My kids are old now, so I kind of forget how many times we got vaccinations. But anyway, we made this map years ago at the request of a state agency to show which school districts are in compliance for the total number of kindergartners who have all required vaccinations by the school year. And then you can kind of click on any one school district. The ones that are in red are out of compliance. So again, as a policy mapper, I asked, what are you interested in? We want to know which districts are in compliance, but we're more concerned about those that are out of compliance. And I said, okay, what is compliance? They said 90% or higher. So the dark gray districts are at or near 90%. If you are anywhere close to a bright red, you're probably down around 50%. Like this one is down to 53% of the kindergartners do not have all their required immunizations. So we give them a bright red color, but we also want to use some subtlety. Like you see right here, several districts are at the 50% level, but this one, this district's making progress. It's not there yet. It's still pink, but it's making progress. And also look at this one. It's right next to a dark gray one, which probably has 90% compliance, but this one probably is near 70. I mean, it's starting to head the wrong direction. And that's what we want you to think about. And by extension, the people you serve with your data and maps, help them understand some areas are good, some areas are bad, some areas are moving towards the good, and some areas are moving towards the bad. What is your strategy for each of those? It's not one size fits all strategy. Businesses don't operate that way. Why would government? So what I mean is, if you're a district that has 90% compliance, the strategy with that district is very different than the district which has low compliance. You're going to have to embrace what are the issues going on in that district. Is it income? Is it education? Is it availability of vaccines? What are the unique problems? So your strategy is going to vary. And these maps help you kind of start to segment the districts into what would we do in the areas that are bright red versus the areas that are pink and maybe head in the right way. This is another interesting map. Notice that the map is relatively small and the chart is very big. This is a map showing the number of judges needed in each county in California. A study was done looking at the caseload of criminal and civil litigation. And the estimated number of judges needed is greater in these two counties than anywhere else. But sometimes the map isn't as compelling as something else. The chart really shows how big is the gap. The number of additional judges needed for these two counties when compared to the level of need for other counties is very, very significant. So sometimes the map only tells you locationally where is the need, and then it turns out the chart might be a better way to express it. I have found in my career that simple is better than complex. I don't know about you. In many cases, it's better to keep things simple. This is a map of all the historic burn areas. So I live right about, let's see, there's the grid. So I'm right about here. And there are several miles of irrigated green lawns, because I live in a subdivision, between me and all the historic burn areas near me. This is a very simple map that takes all the historic burn areas from CAL FIRE and just displays them in a semi-transparent way on top of the map. And then what do you think these dots are? They're people. These are the housing units. It's a dot density map of housing units by census block group. So you get a sense of where the density is. And of course, what you're concerned about, I'm not sure it's making its way. I'm not sure you can see this as well as I would like, but what you can see over here near Yucaipa, there was a bad fire there last year. And the historic burn area indicates we have built housing up into historic burn areas. And this is the policy map I wanted to create. This is the map I envisioned in my head. Just listening to people talk about wildfire and talk about the issues related to wildfire in California. It's the co-location of housing with areas that are prone to burn. That's the problem. So naturally, my question was, well, we have this historic burn area layer, and we have a layer of where the housing units are. Why don't I combine them so that I can show a map like this to a Yucaipa official or a Yucaipa police or fire and kind of say, is this a problem? And of course, I know the answer ahead of time. Yeah, it's a problem to build into areas you know have burned often. So I want to talk a little bit about how do we do this. Now, this is the challenge we all wish for. We all want, when we're working on a problem, whether we are data people or mapping people or managers or ideas, or we're good writers, good policymakers, whatever. The challenge we all wish for is we want to have a clear problem to solve. And it's great if we already know how to solve it. And we have all the data we need for our map. And we have ideas for what map to show. We have a particular audience in mind. We have unlimited time and unlimited resources. But of course, this is the reality that we often don't know what problem to solve just yet. You know, think back 18 months ago when COVID began to spread around the globe. Nobody knew how to solve it. Not sure anybody totally knows how to solve it now, but at least we can recognize, have I ever solved this problem before using a map? And sometimes the case is we don't know what the problem is we're really going after. We're not sure how we're going to solve it. We might have some data for the map, but there's a lot of data out there. I've been working 27 years in this industry, and I'm constantly surprised by what kind of data is still out there that I've never seen before. And I'm like, wow, I have much to learn. We don't necessarily have ideas. So maybe we'll just map the data as is. And I jokingly put, no, don't do that. Don't do that if it's the only thing you do. It's okay to just start mapping the data to get familiar with it and figure it out. But I see in GIS industry a lot, sometimes people will make a map as a starting point, and then it never improves. It never becomes the answer to a question because nobody steps in as a policy mapper to say, this map should not be so generic. This map should answer a specific question. If we don't have an audience in mind, it's okay for you as the person making the map to decide, I am making this map for the public to see, or I am making this map for the statistical organization who provided the data. I want them to see their own data, but I want them to see it through this lens. It takes an assertiveness to jump into these gaps and sense there is a gap. Nobody knows what to do. Nobody knows what to map. Okay, we'll start making maps, start making ideas, put them down on paper, digital, and see. And we all work within time limits of a specific nature with limited resources. I'm going to keep going a little bit because I think many of you have seen ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World. It's included with ArcGIS. If you have any ArcGIS software, ArcGIS Living Atlas is included with your subscription or with your install. So it includes ready-to-use content. These are maps that are completed, applications you can just use, layers of data that you can just integrate with 1 or 2 clicks into your map, into your thought. So back here where I say we have some data for a map, no, actually you've got a ton of data. There's about 10,000 items in the Living Atlas alone on these topics, everything from transportation, landscape, infrastructure, etc. And we have a team of people, I'm one of them, who curate it, meaning we look for the best available source for traffic information, like this map here, or the best available source for elevation data, so you know where the volcano is, or smoke from fires. So we look for the best available sources, and INEGI and the Mexican census data that is available in Living Atlas is part of that. Our content includes base maps, layers, apps, and tools. Increasingly, we're starting to put tools like rule packages, deep learning packages, something called raster function templates for dealing with imagery, and other ready to deploy templates for what we call web experiences. These are applications. So it's more than data. It's much, much more than data in the Living Atlas. From that effort, I was asked to lead a team to put together something called policy maps. And these are maps that illuminate the issue and they show you exactly where an intervention might be needed. We like to put applications in that humanize and contextualize the issues, dashboards that track things, and it's all available here at esri.com/policy maps. And as I've shared with Esri Mexico, this is an application whose concept can easily be replicated, duplicated for Mexico. This is an American site. It's mostly, I would say it's 99% US content because that's where our project started. And the question of, could it be used for Mexico? It could, technically, but there's a lot more to it. For example, we spend a lot of time putting new and updated policy maps into this collection, for example, from the US Census Bureau. We have a monthly update from our Bureau of Labor Statistics showing an unemployment update. So you can see on the map, you know, in this example, unemployment in Las Vegas increased in the past 12 months at this particular time frame. Or we did a lot of work on environmental policy maps where we're combining data about our natural systems with political boundaries, congressional district boundaries, and other things to make county officials or Congress people aware, you know, congressperson, did you know your district has had the biggest air quality impact, has had the biggest decrease in air quality in the entire country? We want to be able to put the natural data about climate change, data about the environment into a context where it matters to a local official. So I'm going to stop there. Any good questions, Andrea?
Yes. Sergio Carrera asked, can you share some examples using a timeline? Is it possible to appreciate the movements on the map over time?
Oh. How did you know? How did this person know? Whose question was that?
Sergio Carrera.
Okay. Way to go. I thought time might come up. This is an example of a Living Atlas layer that a clever JavaScript developer turned into a timeline animation. So this is showing the number of cases of COVID by county in the US as it changes over time. So the timeline is playing one day at a time, very rapidly, and you start to see COVID breathing in the country, unfortunately. So the growth in number of cases is symbolized. You see San Antonio growing bigger. Now Chicago's growing bigger, and all of the Midwest. And then it goes back down. So I'll hit play again. Great question. Many data sets do have a time component, and sometimes our first instinct is to simply animate it like this, which is great. And then down here, you start to see that the developers started thinking about different events relating to the timeline. So for example, last year, Labor Day was September 7th, about 1 year ago. So you can play the timeline from Labor Day forward, or you can play the timeline from Christmas forward, or the Sturgis motorcycle rally up here in the West. And so that was a very interesting project because the data was coming in every day. We have a timestamp for each one, and the JavaScript API allows us to do even more things than what is possible in the web maps. Good question. And I'll show you another byproduct of that same data set. This is a policy map I created with Charlie Fry that shows the up and down COVID trends for the past week. So I'm living here in San Bernardino County. Things have been getting strongly better for 3 weeks. And you can see that in this chart that for the past 3 weeks, we had an uptick in June. We kind of peaked in about 3 weeks ago, and then our counts of COVID cases per week has been dropping steadily for 3 weeks. And that's what this map is indicating. Areas in orange, things are getting better. Areas in purple, things are getting worse. That's the same data source as the COVID animation. Where is it? Here it is. That's the same data source as this, just two different products. The key idea here is one person had an idea about how to animate it and why to animate it, and another person had an idea of how to summarize it by week, because many of the agencies, like the whole state of Nebraska, stopped reporting data daily. They will only report data once a week now. So that was part of the change. Good question.
Great. We have another question from Jimena Angeles. She says that what is the maximum number of variables that you think can be shown in a map in order to keep it easy to read at a glance?
The maximum number of variables shown on a map in order to keep it easy. Yeah, I think I'm always biased. I want to start with 1. And maybe I can get to 2 using, for example, let's go to here. Sorry. I love these live questions because it gets me to think. Let's do ACS current. And no. Let's not do that. Let's use Mexico data. Yeah. All right. Sorry. My brain just caught up. So here we're using 1 variable. We're showing 1 thing. It's the percent, it is the average number of occupants in a home. So as we zoom in, it's multi-scale, we get more detail, which is nice, and I can ask it questions. Now, this is 1 variable, it answers 1 question. What is the average household size in Mexico? But watch what happens if we do this. If I add the total population as a second attribute, now it's going to use color as it was before, but it's going to add size. So now suddenly I see the size is based on the total population of the, what are these, poblaciones? So now the map is saying something slightly different, isn't it? Now you can definitely see the urban area of the city, you know, but I'm totally unfamiliar with almost all Mexican geography. So for me, this is very informative to kind of see where are the urban clusters versus not. So sometimes adding that second attribute of a count, a related count, adds a lot. Then there are maps like, let's go to here. Yeah, let's go to predominant. So there are several map styles now that provide the ability to look at what is the predominant group. And these will use up to 10 attributes, 10 fields. So this is showing, in this case, by county, and then even down to neighborhood, what is the predominant race or ethnicity of people living in that area. So a very colorful map, and it's made possible. And for those of you who love statistical data, you're going to love this map style, because I'll show you how it's made. Look, on the right side, it uses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different variables. And this map style is called predominance, and it asks a simple question. Which of these 8 has the highest number? And the result determines the color that's applied to the map. I can, with one click, add a 9th variable. What is the sum of the populations being shown? And so now this map looks almost like a map of grapes, right, on the vine. Where are the people? It's a very different looking map, but sometimes that's what we kind of need to see, that sometimes, where this map, it looks like there are people spread evenly across the landscape, even up here. Now, I happen to know this is all mountains, but this map doesn't really give a clear indication of that, where this map does give a better indication. Oh, for some reason, there's not many people settled up here. Well, yeah, it's a bunch of mountains, that's why. So, oh, and then you can easily transition over to a dot density style using the same 8 attributes. With one click, I've shown you 3 maps of the same topic. This is why I love WebGIS. Next question.
Okay, we have no questions from the audience, but I have a question. How would you describe briefly the process to make a policy map?
Start asking questions. My process is to start making maps like this. We got an assignment the other day to work with a data set called Environmental Justice Screen. And they said, can you make a map of, can you get your team to make some policy maps about this? I said, sure, send me the layer. So they did. And the layer looks like, yeah, this is what we were given. And this is where I can relate to this question. This is all I was given. All it said is, the title is EPA EJ Environmental Justice Screen. Someone put the layer up. I immediately go to the data. So that's where I start. And I look to see what are the attributes available. So I can look through the fields if I want. And thankfully, the person who created this, they took the time to put the data up, but they didn't just use the field names. They actually went in and gave them aliases so that they're understandable. And I agreed to take on this project as soon as I saw, okay, you've given me good data with clear names that I can understand. Great, now let me go read about it. So we went off and read all about, the EJ screen, the methodology, and then we just started this way. We opened the map. And very briefly, we then start to experiment with it. So the first thing I do is change the base map to something more neutral and something where I can see labels and things like that. So I choose a neutral base map. So now I'm just focused on the color. And now I want to know, well, what do they want to know from this? And in this case, they said, we don't know yet. They want to see what creative things we could do with this data. And long story short, I ended up creating this map where, let's zoom around a little bit. If I go to the USA level, it's not very, very interesting. It only becomes interesting as you look at individual areas. So I started looking around at the topic. This is supposed to be about traffic proximity and the pollution that gets created. So those homes that live near major roads that have lots of traffic are thought to have a greater amount of pollution than homes further away. And so they wanted to express that. The first thing I do is try to get the map to look interesting and compelling. And then the second thing, the key move is here. I think if you spend time working on the pop-up, trying to explain the data, you see I chose a hybrid approach. I put a list of fields, not all of them. There are about 100 different fields in this layer. And out of those list of fields, you can see here, I only used, that doesn't tell me how many. I only used a small handful of the 100 fields available. So I listed them just so I could become confident that I'm using this data correctly. But the key move is I kept reading their documentation to say, what does this data mean? And in this case, there's something called a percentile. And a percentile of 100 means you're the worst in the country. And so if I click on, this one, which is near an interstate, they are ranked 85th. They're in the 85th percentile. So they're not quite the worst, but they're not really great, which is why they're colored in a bright red. So that's why I chose that particular color palette, is I wanted to kind of punish those blocks that are near highways. I want to punish them with a bright color. And those that have a low score, I want to reward them with kind of a nice blue color. In other words, they don't matter. And then lastly, to give them something visually interesting to talk about, we used a technique called blending, where I'm using a layer showing the world population footprint to kind of see how you can really tell where the urban area is. And the rest is important, but now I can really see that urban area. It probably shows up a little bit better now that I think about it, if I put it back on that neutral base map. And as you zoom out, you can definitely kind of see where the urban areas are. It's an iterative process, and I just try to stand in the middle between the idea, the data, and what was the question they have. And if they don't have a question yet, I will just start sending them maps saying, what do you think of this? And if they say, it's pretty, but I don't know what it means, I'll say, what do you want it to mean? What do you want this map to tell you? And as soon as you ask that, at least 50% of the time, you'll get a great answer where you say, aha, okay, I know what I want to do.
Great. So always working with a partner. We have another question here. What suggestions do you have to avoid that small regions, sometimes important regions, do not go unnoticed on a map?
Oh, I love this question. This is one of my favorite questions. Let's work it with your data. So back to this example. There are many small regions on this map. And the challenge is the small regions, they all just kind of blend in because, look at this polygon. It's big. It just happens to be physically large. Or this one down here is physically large, where look at all these little ones in the city. They're all tiny. So it's kind of funny that the rural areas often have the biggest blocks of color unless you add that second attribute. So that is why I'm a big fan of adding some kind of second attribute to give a sense of the size of the problem, right? So the color is indicating the average of occupants in a home, and the second attribute is indicating the count of people there, right? So that's one way to draw attention. If I were to do it on this map about education, I would simply go add that second field about illiterate. And this is the population age 15. So now we're going to show the percentage and the population together. And as a result, now I can kind of see, okay, in Mexico City, I've got one kind of problem to solve, but in some of these other areas, you know, this is going to be hard to reach these smaller communities out in the more rural areas, but at least now I can see them on the map.
Great. We have another question from Sergio Carrera. He says, using your example of burn areas, you identify the area in which the fire frequently occurs. Then you add a population layer, but if both are in movement, both population and fire, we could see when that area began to be populated, and then you could know if at that time there was a failure of regulation or policy, supervision or corruption. What is your opinion?
Yeah, you're brilliant. Yeah, that's my opinion. That's the exact right approach. So you have correctly identified that when I start with burn area, see that oh, what a great question. This map is one that I made with my colleague Julia. She built the layers, and then we worked on getting this into a simple map. This is exactly why we make the map, because you have correctly detected that these burn areas come in over time and these housing units come in over time. And I have presented an oversimplified view of the world, which led you to ask that great question. Shouldn't we do a presentation that shows them coming in together over time? Absolutely. And that is why, that is the sign of a successful policy map. It answers a specific question, but it raises 3 more good questions, right? And that is perfect example of why we do this work. We are never satisfied. I never think any of my maps are done. I think I took them as far as I want to, given the time available. And now I put it into the hands of either the data expert, the policymaker, the journalist, the public, for them to kind of, they need time to think about it, right? They need time to think and ask a better question. Great.
We have no more questions for the moment. Would you like to continue?
Yeah, I'll just, how much time do we have?
Ricardo, I think it was 1 hour and a half.
Yes, we can go to 1 hour and a half, yes.
Well, cool. Yeah. So, yeah, we collected out of the Living Atlas as roughly 10,000 interesting maps, apps, and layers. We have taken about 1,000 of those and put them into this Esri Maps for Public Policy collection. It has an interface where you can search, and then you can collect several maps into a collection and share them. So what we tend to do is just message and talk about these topics internally, and to our customers. We will list out some of the more interesting work that's going on, like FCC broadband is a popular topic recently in the States. So we made some maps on specific topics relating to that. So I want to be clear, we will often list the sources of our data because chances are good that our user community has heard of these things. They have heard of the American Community Survey, and they have heard of the FCC's broadband data, but they may not have seen a map like this. So we're using their name to get them to look at different perspectives on that data. So my last kind of discussion about this is to talk about you. So I don't know all of you, obviously, but this is the way I talk about your role and how do you see yourself in this? Maybe today you've seen a little bit that you have to have an idea You may have to do some analysis, like I did that analysis of the railroads and the proximity of population to the railroad. And that generates data. So usually people have an idea, we do some analysis, and that generates more data. And then you have to figure out, well, how am I going to show that? You know, to the gentleman who said we should look at the historic burn areas over time, and we should look at the growth of population over time in order to show bad decisions, good decisions, corruption, right? In that one question, there were ideas expressed. There was an outline of how to analyze it, i.e. over time, which would lead to more data that then we would have to create a animated map to show the growth and change of both over time, right? So that is me sitting in the middle, working remotely with the person who had an idea to say, what would we actually do to make this go? So for all of the maps in Living Atlas for the Mexican census, you can take yourself in, you can put yourself in this position to say, I want to work with ideas. Or maybe some of you are more comfortable working with data and you've never made a map before. You saw me clicking around, I can get it done. It's the case that the WebGIS and the map viewer available in Arcgis Line make it very easy for you to simply explore the data. Now, how do you do it? My point is you iterate. Just stay in here, get yourself in between the people with the ideas, the people with the data, and be that person who starts to ask questions about how do I analyze it and how do I map it? And it just keeps going around and around. You iterate it and it has to start somewhere. So my point is make a map, make that first map and show it to somebody. Say, I'm interested in the relationship between this and that. And I think this map starts to show it. And as you participate with others, that's how these maps get better and better, and how you lift, that's how you lift people up, I think. And I hit the wrong button, hang on. So let me share back over to, yep. So where do you start and how do you iterate? Usually it means get the layer into the map viewer. I work almost exclusively in map viewer these days. I do some work in Pro, ArcGIS Pro, but mostly I come in here because I can be a lot faster in here thanks to the tools that they have available. So if I just want to focus on topics related to air quality, I can do that. If I want to type cancer, those are the 4 attributes they have on the topic of cancer. If I want to talk about people who are age 64 and above, these are the things. So I can just find it and I just touch it and the map is going to respond. And I love that. Okay. It's grumpy. We'll give up on him for a second. Let's stay in Mexico. Others of you who work on the data side of things, please notice the effort that has been made with these attributes. There is a lot of value to be had if someone builds a layer like this, where it has a field name, and that was probably defined by a database expert or a subject matter expert. It has an alias, in this case, in Spanish and in English, and it's shown here. And that was a deliberate choice to broaden the audiences available. And then, yeah, you can see sample values, sum of numbers. But because someone takes the time to document their data, now I don't have to go to some website to look up what all these field names mean. I can just look at it and say, yeah, let's switch to percentage of homes with no telephone. This should be an interesting map. And so we instantly get one look at this data, and we can zoom in. And then we would next start to think about, okay, what should the pop-up say? Well, if I'm switching to talk about telephone, I would want to rewrite this in a plain sentence to communicate the information about that particular topic. And so that's what I like about these applications and maps is once I get relatively happy with my initial version and I get the pop-up to say what I'd like it to say, maybe with a chart as well, I can then go down and share the map with someone pretty quickly. So that's, I think, how you get things to start moving quickly with whomever you're working. Now, more examples. What else would you like to see, perhaps? This is the Esri Maps for Public Policy site. If I'll go to the home page. Currently, this is, like, as I said, it's mainly focused on questions relating to the US. So, for example, on the homepage, there are a series of questions that deal with different aspects of a community, and you can just type in a location and it'll go there. So what do we know about education in my community? So if I go to Redlands, California and hit explore, I'm immediately taken into a collection of 5 maps. It says up here, map 1 of 5. The first map, I live right about here in the center of the map. Where are people who started college but did not finish? And so again, it's got a nice legend. The legend is written in plain language with colors that explain the topic. And when I touch an area, it gives me more information in a readable format. If I go to the next map, where are disconnected youth? These are youth who are not in school and they are not in the labor force. So they're not getting education and they're not working. So where are the large numbers of kids who are in that situation? And at a glance, I can kind of see the big dark red circles. Those are the areas with greater concern. It's a concern wherever it is, but now you can kind of see, oh, okay, where might I intervene? Where might I define a program to help out with this topic?
We have another question.
Oh yeah, go for it.
In your experience, what are the main attributes or features on a map that best allow you to connect and engage with users?
Simplicity of visualization. So from at a glance, you ought to be able to see an interesting pattern that makes you want to click on it and find out more. And the other aspect is you've got to have a pop-up that explains whatever the user clicks on. So if I click on this, tell me something useful. Now, in this case, they did a little bit of both. They wrote a sentence and they provided some backup data, right? Compare that to a style of pop-up like, let's go to this one. Sorry, let me get to one where I'm logged in. For some reason, I'm not signed in anywhere. There we go. Oh, I was going to talk about this one too. So in this case, this pop-up gives you the location of the plant, and it explains in plain English, plain language, this location produces 5.8% of all the benzene measured in the state. Benzene is a very bad thing. And this plant up here produces 11% of it. Now, if I were to compare that to a pop-up that looks like this, if I take this text out and merely add a list of fields, see how much different this pop-up is? where do you find the information here that says this is the biggest producer of benzene in this state, right? You got to dig for it. You got to go find it. And that's why we don't recommend that pattern. We recommend a pattern where you insert yourself as the interpreter to say, I'm going to make sure that when a user clicks on this plant, they get information. So I think that's the two things. Make it visually apparent. This is what we're talking about. So in this case, I judge it by the legend. Areas with high benzene production are in red. And then you see, I also was mean, to be honest. I'm going to punish this plant with a huge size because it turns out this one plant is 15% of all the bad stuff in the state, and they produce 11,000 pounds of it. That's a lot. So that's why they get this giant symbol. And all these other ones, yeah, they're producing benzene as well, but you know, it's only 2% here, and then out here, it's 0%. So it's an editorial thing. It's an uncomfortable thing. The first time I showed this map to the state of California, they were a little shocked, and they kind of didn't want me to make the map this way. And I said, do you think your opponents will avoid making the map this way? And that's when they kind of understood it. It's okay. We can work with this map.
I wanted to ask you another question. So if anyone in the audience wanted to start working with maps, what would you recommend for them to start understanding the technology behind policy maps? And are there any learned lessons that you would recommend for people to start to work with data in the Living Atlas and mapping them in ArcGIS Online?
Yeah, that's a great question. We happen to have a few learned lessons available just on policy mapping. So in addition to learning to make a GIS map, we have some learned lessons, including this one about planning education outreach with Mexican census data. This was built using the INEGI stuff. So my colleague Julia wrote it, and it walks you through step by step how to add a layer from Living Atlas. You'll find the Census INEGI 2020 information, and it walks you through how to add it to the map and get that first version going. I think the total time on this lesson it says 45 minutes, but I think it's actually a little shorter. And then we have some additional lessons available, I think 5 or 6 in total. Yeah, if you just search policy, I'll tell you what, I'll put this in the chat if I can find it. Yes, I can. I sent that to just, there you go. So that is the link that gets you started. And if I can say what's changed in my 30 years of working in GIS, anybody can get started pretty quickly. GIS used to be hard, mapping used to be super hard, but you can kind of go through this lesson and start to see it really is not that hard at all. You just touch the thing that you want to change. Once you learn where the buttons are to touch, then it's just you being a curious person. This map is showing the % of benzene and the total amount of benzene. If I want to change it, I just touch it and go in and change it, right? Maybe write a formula or do whatever you need to.
That's great. Someone is asking if you use particular stratification techniques when coloring a map.
Particular what techniques?
Stratification techniques when coloring a map.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's look at it together. Let's use, yeah. All right, so back to this map. Or was it this one? Yeah, that's fine. So if I want to change this to a different topic, something I've never worked with before. So let's find, here you go. This is the percentage of population from 18 to 24 years old who attend school. So kind of college age people. And let's go to the layers. Sorry, I'm just going to turn off this layer because it's, yeah, distracting. Okay. So when you choose this field, we show you the histogram of the data, and we show you the mean of the data. So on average, we're looking at municipalities. On average, the average municipality, 2.5% of the population aged 18 to 24 are attending school. Okay. And then, so where do these numbers come from? Well, they're one standard deviation above and below the mean. So if you have a nice bell-shaped histogram like this, see how it's got this nice shape? It kind of sneaks up and then it goes back down. If you've got a nice normal distribution, you can count on this setting is going to produce a useful map. The areas in the darker blue are higher percentage, and it's a meaningful higher percentage. The way GIS traditionally teaches things is to classify, use 5 classes, and it kind of cookie cuts the data. So everybody at 4.74% and higher gets one color. Everything from 3.4 to 4.7, you all get one color. There's no difference between you. We don't care. That's what this map is saying. This map is saying when you turn classification off, it's saying, I do care. I do want to know where this varies. And then the next thing I do is try to figure out, is all the data equally important? Maybe I just want to emphasize all those values above average. So the only thing on this map that's getting color are those features which are above the average. Or if I flip it, now I want you to pay attention to all those features that are below the average. Maybe I want to use an alert color or a calm color. So these are all kind of decisions you get to make. We also have different themes. Sometimes this is the best thing you can do. Like this is often the first map I'll show people. I'll use this above and below pattern, right? So after I picked this attribute, I pick it, and then I go in here and I change this to above and below because I want to tell the story of areas in blue have an above average percent of people attending school. Areas in red have a low. So if you're thinking of promoting education, where do you need to go do it? Well, again, back to strategy. For areas that are in the darkest blue color, they're already attending at a pretty good clip. So I might leverage that positiveness with a program or a marketing campaign or funding to continue what is already started. Areas in red are struggling to produce the numbers. Now, maybe there's just not the number of people there. You got to dig into that, but you might have a different strategy. And then areas towards the middle, they could go one way or the other. So those often are the areas where you want to implement policies that nudge it one way or the other. And again, with this, lots of color options for you to decide, how do I want to use it? This is a very good pattern, the purple to red. Purple is a alert color. It's a color that says, I want you to pay attention to me. So we try to think about, when do I use purple or magenta, and which side of the histogram deserves that attention, the top or the bottom? And that's entirely on you to kind of read your audience. That's how I think about it. I always make the map someone asks me to make. If someone tells me they want to see a map that uses classification, I will make it for them. But I always will give them a second map that I think does a better job. And usually turning classification off lets you see some of the subtle details. You can see this municipality is slightly better than this one, right? Numerically, in terms of the percentage. So, and that's how our users think a lot. They compare one neighborhood, one municipality to another. And so to see those subtle differences kind of helps. A big trick for all of you is when you go to Living Atlas and you find something you like. So if we just type Mexico, and actually we can even filter it just to show content from Mexico. And let's just, here's all the layers and web maps, but I want to see just the web maps. So you can find a lot of these maps in there. Here are households without access to water. And you can click on that thing. And if you open it and you decide, yeah, I kind of like this, but I want to modify it. All you have to do is sign in to Arcgis Online with your credentials. I chose the wrong one. Sorry about that. So yeah, if you sign in, you'll have an option over here to do what's called Save As. So you can take any web map in Living Atlas, log in and hit Save As, and now it's yours. It'll put copy on the end. You can take that off, but now it's your map. And now you can make whatever changes you want to it and just kind of borrow these concepts, borrow the style of the map and modify it. More questions?
There was a question about the cost. So with all of this maps, interaction, animation, how does the processing cost scale with all those new features that you were describing and rastering options and whatnot?
Yeah, I've incurred no cost today. So Living Atlas content is available to you at no cost unless the item itself indicates, yeah, we charge credits for it. So anything that says subscriber does require you to log in, meaning you've got to have an Arcgis Online account, which is fine. There's no additional cost beyond that. So Living Atlas access to Mexico data is all included. There are certain little things you might do processing if you want to do analysis in the cloud. There are some of those things have credit costs that are very, very low compared to you building that capability. Yeah, I suppose the cost depends on whether your organization has an Arcgis Online enterprise account or whatever. I'm not the expert on the costs.
Cool. There was another question. Is it possible to use these deciles to stratify? So like segments of the distribution of a particular variable to stratify?
Is it possible to like create an index or something?
Yeah, well, deciles are like these 10, we usually use those to make chunks of the households, like ordered from low income to higher income, and we put them in 10 equal sized buckets.
We have several options for how to do that. So example, quantile is the option that if you say I want 4 equal classes, then you can see what it's doing on the histogram. Like if I wanted decile, I would just change this to 10. Oops, yeah, 10. So now this is a decile map with the values indicated. So each of these has 1/10 of the observations, 1/10 of the features. Yeah.
Well,
so this is a
great.
decile map. Yep.